Could you please support my channel by subscribing? The year was 2045, and the world seemed more united than ever before. But the calm that had settled over the world was about to shatter. It began with a faint disturbance. Deep space telescopes at NASA and European Space Agency observatories picked up an anomaly, a distant, erratic signal moving through the outer reaches of the solar system. At first, it was dismissed as nothing more than cosmic background noise or an asteroid passing through a magnetic field. But as the weeks passed, the signal grew stronger. It wasn't random at all. Something was coming. At NASA's Deep Space Observation Unit in Houston, Dr. Rachel Summers, one of the world's leading astrophysicists, was the first to raise the alarm. Sitting in her quiet office late one evening, she stared in disbelief at the data on her screen. What she saw wasn't a natural phenomenon, it was organized, and it was headed straight for Earth. "These are ships," she whispered to herself, her pulse quickening. She quickly alerted the Pentagon and NATO command. Within hours, a state of emergency was declared across the alliance. World leaders gathered in an emergency summit to discuss the anomaly, now clearly identified as a fleet of massive alien vessels. The situation was unprecedented. An extraterrestrial force was heading directly toward Earth, and there was no time to prepare. Days later, the alien ships entered Earth's orbit. They were unlike anything ever imagined, enormous dark vessels that blocked out the sky, their surfaces black as obsidian and seemingly absorbing all light. They hung motionless over major cities in NATO countries: Washington, D.C., London, Paris, Berlin, and Ottawa. The sheer size of the ships dwarfed anything mankind had built, and despite countless attempts to communicate, the alien invaders gave no response. The world held its breath. Then the first attack came. Without warning, a beam of white-hot energy shot down from the ship hovering over Washington, D.C., obliterating everything in its path. In an instant, the White House was gone, reduced to rubble along with several surrounding blocks. The National Mall, with its historic monuments, disappeared in a blinding flash. Panic spread across the city as citizens ran for their lives, but no one could escape the devastation. Within minutes, other cities fell victim. Paris, London, and Berlin were all hit in quick succession. Each strike was precise, leaving entire city centers in ruins. Governments scrambled to respond, but the alien technology was far beyond anything NATO's military forces could handle. Missiles, fighter jets, and even nuclear strikes were powerless against the energy shields that protected the alien ships. The invaders, now identified as the Zenithar, had come to Earth with one purpose: conquest. There was no attempt at negotiation, no message of demands. They had simply arrived, and they were here to destroy. In the days that followed, the situation grew worse. The Zenithar began deploying ground forces, giant, armored soldiers that marched through the ruined cities, capturing any survivors. These invaders were relentless, their advanced energy weapons cutting through tanks and helicopters like paper. Civilian populations fled in terror, but there was no safe place to hide. Amidst the chaos, NATO forces tried to organize a defense. President David Marshall of the United States took command of the situation, coordinating with other world leaders from a secure underground bunker deep in the Rocky Mountains. Marshall was known for his strong leadership, and he understood the gravity of what was happening. "This is not the end," he declared in a worldwide broadcast from the bunker. "We will not fall without a fight." NATO was formed to defend against any threat, and today we face the greatest threat in human history. But we are strong, we are united, and we will not surrender. The United States, as the leader of NATO, quickly mobilized its military forces. Thousands of troops were deployed along with every available jet, drone, and missile system. NATO's European and Canadian allies followed suit, preparing their armies for what seemed like a hopeless battle. But despite their efforts, the alien technology was far more advanced than anything they had ever seen. The Zenithars' energy shields rendered all human weapons useless. It seemed as though the world was on the verge of collapse. But in the darkness, hope still flickered. At NASA, Dr. Summers and her team were working tirelessly to study the alien ships, searching for any weakness. With every passing hour, more data came in from satellites and ground-based sensors. Summers knew that if there was any hope of saving Earth, it would come from understanding the invaders' technology. And time was running out. The Zenithar invasion was swift and brutal. Within weeks, they had reduced several major NATO cities to smoldering ruins. Washington, D.C., Paris, London, Berlin all lay in ashes, their landmarks destroyed, and their citizens scattered in terror. The alien ships loomed over these once thriving centers of human civilization, like black clouds signaling an eternal storm. The ground forces, massive armored Zenithar soldiers, patrolled the ruins, capturing anyone they found and cutting down those who resisted. The situation was growing more desperate by the day. NATO's traditional military responses, fighter jets, drones, and even nuclear missiles, had been rendered ineffective by the Zenithars' seemingly impenetrable energy shields. Each counterattack failed, and morale began to falter. Refugee camps swelled as millions fled from the ravaged cities. The Zenithar showed no mercy and no sign of stopping. In the face of this overwhelming force, NATO's leaders gathered in underground bunkers, connected only by secure satellite links. From these hidden fortresses, they worked tirelessly to coordinate what little resistance they could muster. President David Marshall of the United States took charge of the global response, his leadership becoming the backbone of the NATO effort. "This war isn't just about survival," Marshall said during a broadcast to the remaining free populations of the world. "It's about defending everything we stand for. We are NATO. We are the last line of defense for humanity, and we will not give up." His words resonated. But the military reality was grim. Every day, the Zenithar forces pushed further into NATO territories, devastating cities across Europe and North America. Even smaller NATO member nations like Denmark, Portugal, and Norway were under siege, their defenses crumbling under the weight of the alien onslaught. Despite the devastation, NATO continued to fight. Elite Special Forces units from across the Alliance SEALs, British SAS, French commandos, and others carried out daring raids behind enemy lines. They sabotaged alien strongholds, rescued survivors, and gathered intelligence on Zenithar technology. But even their best efforts were just delaying the inevitable. The world needed a miracle. That miracle seemed impossible, but at NASA's Deep Space Observation Unit, Dr. Rachel Summers was determined to find it. Working around the clock with a team of international scientists, Summers studied every piece of data collected on the Zenithar fleet. Satellite images, sensor readings, intercepted transmissions, nothing was overlooked. The aliens' energy shields were unlike anything seen before, but Summers believed that they could be defeated. After weeks of exhaustive research, Dr. Summers and her team made a breakthrough. They discovered that the Zenithar shields were not invincible. The shields, which repelled every known weapon, operated on a specific electromagnetic frequency. For brief moments measured in milliseconds, the shields fluctuated, leaving them vulnerable to a very specific type of attack. The challenge, however, was that these windows of vulnerability were too short for conventional weapons to exploit. Even the fastest missiles and drones couldn't strike quickly enough to get through. Summers took her findings directly to NATO Command, where President Marshall and General Mark Hawthorne, the head of NATO's Special Defense Forces, listened intently. Hawthorne, a no-nonsense strategist, had been leading NATO's ground resistance since the start of the invasion. "This is our chance," Dr. Summers explained, her voice filled with urgency. "The Zenithar shields can be disrupted, but we need the right technology to do it. We need an electromagnetic pulse weapon, something powerful enough to knock their shields offline, even for a few seconds." General Hawthorne leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "We don't have that kind of weaponry." Not yet, Summers replied, but the United States has been working on something. Project Sentinel. Project Sentinel was a top-secret initiative led by the United States, designed to develop advanced defense technologies for future space conflicts. One of the prototypes developed through the program was the EMP cannon, a high-energy electromagnetic pulse weapon capable of disrupting electronic systems over large distances. The technology was untested in real combat, but it was the only hope they had. President Marshall made the decision without hesitation. Get that weapon ready for deployment. Project Sentinel's EMP cannon was transported to NATO base Skjold in Norway, one of the last remaining strongholds not yet under Zenithar control. The base had become a key center for NATO's defense operations, with its strategic location deep in the mountains providing some protection from the ongoing assaults. But the Zenithar had taken notice. As the EMP cannon was brought online and prepared for its first real-world test, Zenithar forces began to converge on Norway. The mothership that had devastated Washington, D.C. now hovered over Scandinavia, its ominous presence sending waves of panic through the NATO forces stationed there. President Marshall and General Hawthorne arrived at Skjold to oversee the operation personally. The plan was simple but incredibly dangerous. The EMP cannon needed to be fired at the exact moment when the Zenithar shields fluctuated, creating a brief opening for a direct strike. The success of the mission would rely on precise timing and coordination. Failure is not an option, General Hawthorne said as he briefed the assembled troops. Elite soldiers from the United States, the UK, France, Canada, and Norway gathered in the war room, their faces grim but determined. If we fail here, there won't be a second chance. This is our last shot. As the Zenithar forces began to land on Norwegian soil, the battle for NATO's survival intensified. NATO's ground forces engaged the alien warriors in fierce combat while drones and fighter jets battled the Zenithar ships in the sky. It was a fight unlike anything humanity had ever seen, a clash of futuristic technology against an alien force that had nearly wiped them out. Dr. Summers and General Hawthorne worked tirelessly in the command center, monitoring the Zenithar's energy shields. The window of vulnerability appeared only once every few minutes, and the timing had to be perfect. Suddenly, the Zenithar mothership shields flickered. The moment had come. Now, Summers shouted into the comms. The EMP cannon fired, releasing a massive pulse of energy that surged toward the alien ship. For a heart-stopping second, nothing seemed to happen. Then, the Zenithar's shields collapsed. The alien ship was exposed. All units fire, Hawthorne commanded. NATO's forces unleashed everything they had: missiles, artillery, and drones rained down on the Zenithar mothership. Explosions ripped through the alien hull, sending debris flying in all directions. The Zenithar ship trembled, and then, with a deafening roar, it began to descend. The sky lit up as the mothership exploded in a massive fireball, crashing into the Norwegian fjords below. For the first time since the invasion began, NATO had struck back. The destruction of the Zenithar mothership was a turning point in the war. The aliens, once thought to be invincible, had been dealt a devastating blow. The news of NATO's victory spread like wildfire across the world, sparking renewed hope in the hearts of millions. Refugees cheered, soldiers celebrated, and for the first time in months it seemed that humanity had a chance. But the war was far from over. The remaining Zenithar ships regrouped, retreating temporarily to assess their losses. NATO knew that the aliens would return, likely with even more force than before. There was no time to rest. The EMP cannon had proven effective, but it was only one weapon. NATO needed more if they were going to win this war. Under President Marshall's leadership, factories across the United States, Canada, and Europe into overdrive, producing more EMP and new technologies based on Dr. Summers' research. Scientific community, united by the urgency of the situation, worked day and night to find additional weaknesses in Zenithar technology. The skies above NATO territories were still filled with alien ships, and the Zenithar's ground forces continued to wreak havoc wherever they landed. But now NATO had a weapon. They had a chance. The final battle was coming, and NATO was determined to be ready. The destruction of the Zenithar mothership over Norway had given humanity a much-needed victory. Across the world, people who had lived in fear for months celebrated, but the euphoria was short-lived. The Zenithar, though wounded, were far from defeated. In the skies above Earth, dozens of their ships still hovered menacingly, and their ground forces continued to ravage what remained of NATO's territories. NATO's leaders, however, were more prepared than ever. The EMP cannon had proven to be the breakthrough they needed, and the weapon's success sparked a global mobilization effort. Factories across the United States, Canada, and Europe were now working around the clock, churning out new EMP devices and enhanced weapons designed to exploit the Zenithar's vulnerability. The final phase of the war was approaching, and NATO was preparing for an all-out assault. President David Marshall, who had become the face of the global resistance, addressed the world from the command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. His speech, broadcast across every NATO nation and resistance camp, was brief but powerful. "The time has come for us to take the fight to them," he declared, his voice filled with resolve. "We are no longer just defending, we are striking back. Humanity will not fall, and today we will prove it." Allied forces across the globe rallied. From underground bunkers in North America to hidden command centers in Europe, NATO's military forces prepared for the largest coordinated attack in history. The United States, as NATO's leader, played a crucial role. American fighter jets, drones, and special operations units stood at the forefront of the offensive, with President Marshall personally overseeing the operation alongside General Mark Hawthorne. The plan was simple but dangerous: take down the Zenithar fleet, ship by ship, using the EMP cannons to disable their shields. Once the shields were down, NATO's forces would strike with everything they had. It was a long shot, but it was humanity's only chance. The Zenithar, realizing that their dominance was now under threat, launched a full-scale attack on NATO's final strongholds. Their fleet descended from the skies in waves, targeting cities and military bases across North America and Europe. The ground shook as alien forces landed in major metropolitan areas, their massive soldiers crushing all in their path. But NATO was ready. In the skies above Washington, D.C., the United States Air Force launched wave after wave of fighter jets and drones, equipped with the newly developed EMPC. The Zenithar ships, their shields flickering and collapsing, were finally vulnerable. The missiles and artillery rained down on the alien vessels, tearing through their hulls. Explosions lit up the sky as the once invincible ships began to fall. Similar battles unfolded across Europe, with NATO forces in Britain, France, and Germany joining the counterattack. The Royal Air Force, backed by U.S. bombers, took down the Zenithar ship over London, while NATO troops in Paris fought street by street, reclaiming the city from alien invaders. From the beaches of Normandy to the streets of Berlin, the combined might of NATO's armies pushed the Zenithar back. But the Zenithar were not giving up easily. Their ground forces fought with ruthless precision, using advanced energy weapons that vaporized anything they touched. Entire platoons of NATO soldiers were wiped out in seconds, and the alien soldiers, towering and seemingly invulnerable, marched onward with terrifying efficiency. In Washington, D.C., President Marshall refused to abandon the fight. He had relocated to a command center just outside the city, where he could oversee the battle firsthand. Alongside General Hawthorne, he directed the U.S. forces as they engaged in brutal street-to-street combat. The American soldiers, outnumbered and facing near impossible odds, fought with unmatched determination. "We hold this city," Marshall ordered, "no matter the cost." As the battles raged across the globe, NATO command realized that the Zenithar fleet had a central point of control: the Zenithar flagship. This massive vessel, larger than any other in the fleet, hovered above the Atlantic Ocean, far out of reach from ground forces. It was clear that the flagship was coordinating the alien attacks, and if NATO could destroy it, the Zenithar's command structure would collapse. The flagship, however, was heavily fortified. Its shields were stronger than any NATO had faced, and even the EMP cannons would only create a brief window of opportunity. It was a suicide mission, but President Marshall knew that this was their only chance to end the war once and for all. "We're going in," Marshall declared. The United States Air Force, led by elite fighter squadrons and special operations units, launched a daring strike on the Zenithar flagship. The mission was high risk, and failure would mean the collapse of the global resistance. The plan: disable the shields with the EMP cannon, then strike the ship's core reactor, causing a chain reaction that would destroy the entire vessel. The air battle over the Atlantic was brutal. American jets, flanked by NATO allies, engaged the Zenithar's remaining fighter drones in a deadly dogfight. Missiles streaked across the sky as the EMP cannons fired, disrupting the flagship's shields. For a brief moment, the ship was vulnerable. "Now," General Hawthorne shouted into the comms. A squadron of U.S. bombers, led by Colonel Sarah Whitaker, dove toward the Zenithar flagship. They unleashed their payload, targeting the core reactor deep within the alien ship. The bombs hit their mark, and a massive explosion ripped through the ship's hull. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed as though nothing had happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the Zenithar flagship began to collapse. Its massive frame broke apart, sending shockwaves through the air and causing the remaining alien ships to fall into disarray. One by one, the Zenithar vessels lost control and crashed into the sea, their command structure shattered. The Zenithar forces on the ground, cut off from their fleet, faltered. Without their central command, the once coordinated alien soldiers became disorganized. NATO's forces pressed the advantage, driving the Zenithar back and retaking the cities that had been lost. The alien invaders, once thought to be invincible, were finally retreating. The war was over. The destruction of the Zenithar flagship marked the end of the invasion. Across the world, cheers erupted as news of the victory spread. Cities that had been reduced to rubble were now being reclaimed, and the remaining Zenithar soldiers were hunted down by NATO forces. The Zenithar fleet, once the greatest threat to Earth, had been defeated. But the cost had been staggering. Entire cities lay in ruins. Millions had perished in the fighting, and the survivors faced a long road to recovery. The war had taken a toll on every NATO nation, and the scars would last for generations. Yet, amidst the devastation, there was hope. Humanity had triumphed against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. NATO had proven that unity, determination, and innovation could overcome even the darkest of threats. In Washington, D.C., his face was lined with exhaustion, but his voice was steady. "So we have endured the unthinkable," he said, "but we stood together. NATO stood together. This war has shown us that no matter the odds, no matter the enemy, we can survive. Now it's time to rebuild." Across the globe, nations began the slow process of recovery. In cities like Paris, Berlin, London, and New York, the rubble was cleared and reconstruction efforts were underway. The scientific breakthroughs made during the war, particularly Dr. Summers' work on the Zenithar shields, would reshape human technology for years to come. And while the world had been forever changed by the Zenithar invasion, there was a sense of unity and resilience that had never been stronger. NATO had not only defended Earth, they had ensured its future. As the survivors looked to the stars, they knew one thing for certain: they would be ready for whatever came next.